Well, here we are on a relatively mild day to talk about the strange features, quirks, idiosyncrasies, whatever else of this 1973 Cutlass S that I have here. This is a 6,000 mile original Cutlass S and the first year of this body style. Now you can see that in this time frame, the Cutlass had this twin port grille theme, kind of similar to Pontiac, actually dipped below the bumper. This was the first year of the bumper standard in the front, 5-mile-an-hour bumper standard, and so there's actually a pretty big bumper offset on this car the designers didn't want, but they kind of had to execute it because, well, that was the legislation. But as I said, this was the first year for this Cutlass body style, and the twin port grille theme carried over actually from the 68 Oldsmobile. That was the first year where Oldsmobile would have that, and really continued all the way through till the end, except on the 95 Aurora when that came out. That did not have that twin port grille theme. Interestingly about these grills, for crash reasons, they're spring loaded, so you can push them back and they deflect. You can see here. Now, let's talk about the rocket emblem here. And this was something that obviously is a hallmark of Oldsmobile. But what were the origins of this rocket logo? Of course, the rocket came from the rocket engine that was introduced in 1949 Oldsmobiles that had overhead valves, and that was relatively revolutionary for the time period. Cadillac also introduced their overhead valve V8 in 1949. Chevrolet would take until 1955. But this rocket emblem, this particular one, was created by Olds designers using a certain inspiration from a luxury make. Can you guess what it is? If you said Lincoln, you'd be correct. They actually basically put the rocket emblem in the Lincoln logo and then removed the crosshatch here. And that was indeed the inspiration. Oldsmobile was trying to look a bit more upmarket, and why not steal from another high-end luxury mark? You're not going to steal the wreath and crest from Cadillac, but you can steal Lincoln's whatever it is symbol and create a rocket out of it. This was the first year for the Colonnade cars, and a lot of people call the coupes the Colonnade coupes, but you can also call the four-doors Colonnade cars as well. And that just denotes that pillar right there, that B pillar in the middle. There were no hardtops anymore on the intermediates in 1973, though GM full-sizers did continue on with the hardtop styling. This was done because General Motors thought that there was an impending rollover standard that was going to be enacted, and it couldn't be met unless there was a B pillar. This is also the reason why Cadillac called its 1976 Eldorado the so-called last convertible. They thought they just weren't able to make convertibles anymore with those impending rollover standards. But that standard was relaxed and all was fine. And actually Chrysler made four-door hardtops until the 1978 model year, so continued on for some time. Ford dropped their four-door hardtops in the full-size cars after the 1974 model year. One other thing you can see here on the side is this theme that would be employed in a number of Oldsmobiles, the so-called skeg lines that you see there and there. This car doesn't have a skirted rear, but the 98, you really see the skeg line that kind of goes over the fender skirt in the rear. And for whatever reason, designers thought that that was a handsome trademark for Olds. Chrysler would kind of borrow it on the 78 New Yorker. Well, the car that came out in 74, actually, the Imperial, but all the way through the 78 New Yorker too, would have that skeg line. Now out back we have a vertical taillight theme. Vertical taillights were often employed on the Olds 98, at least starting in 1963, and that was to really hearken basically or conjure up memories of Cadillac and a luxury theme. Here the Cutlass kind of took that vertical theme, as you see here in the taillights, and 73 is the only year of these that doesn't have the rear 5-mile-an-hour bumper standard. So the bumper is pretty clean, although you can see here that there are bumper guards. I will say as well, this trunk opening looks big, but the trunk in this is not very large. It's not a great use of space, and we'll show that in a minute. Of course, you have a center fuel fill. There's no fuel door on either side. That was typical during this time frame. So you could pull up to either side of the pump. This one is pretty low though. I would not want, it's not very convenient, especially if you're a lady wearing a dress or something like that, to be filling your car and bending over. It's a bit awkward, but that's how it is on this vehicle. You can also see that this vehicle has the remote control outside rear view mirror. This would be the same. It was used across all GM vehicles. Strange quirk about this, obviously this car has a vinyl roof, but it's not all vinyl. And what do I mean by that? That's obviously vinyl, but look at this little piece here. This is actually metal. So the vinyl stops here, and then GM put this little metal trim piece on either side that terminates under the door. For whatever reason, I guess it was easier, probably because this pillar was so thin, to get that vinyl top in there successfully. All right, let's turn to the inside of this Cutlass, and we'll also look at the underhood area. Here we go on the inside, and the first thing you're gonna know, here we go. By the way, I love the tape stripe here on the door that matches the paint. It's just, like I said, a tape stripe. Oh, there it is. Listen to that GM door buzzer. Yes. Lovely. We'll turn that off. So you can see this car has 6,076 miles on it. It has the 354 barrel V8 with the turbohydromatic 350 transmission. Now the first thing about this interior is it obviously has this driver-centric wraparound theme, and a little bit of it. You can see how the IP curves outward here toward the driver. And notice that there are two vents here, and then there are two of these circular vents, which you close by rotating this little thing there, and that closes off and blocks the airflow. I thought that was kind of cool. And these you can move around, up and down, and all around. These are barrel vents that you can rotate up and down, and you can move this middle piece back and forth. Now, I have the original sketch for the theme of this interior. It was done by a gentleman named Marv Fisher, and I'll put it at the bottom right there. And you'll notice that in the original theme, this vent wasn't there. It was added later. He had that vent, he didn't have this one, presumably because the driver gets airflow from these two outlets, and the passenger could get airflow from that rightmost one, but I guess the engineers deemed it wasn't enough and added that there. On these dash panels, you have something interesting. These gauges, well, not the gauges, but these controls are not actually backlit. They're floodlit, and you can see the light there when I turn on the light. Now, the interesting thing about this, so this casts light at night, a green light over the controls here, but the reading light is also incorporated here. And all you do is go like that. And notice it removes the blue shade from the light. So that's how they did the reading light. It's basically one and the same as the floodlight. I thought that was pretty cool. These HVAC controls here are pretty standard GM fare for the era, but I will say that the air conditioning, if you haven't watched the other video, when you turn it to the air conditioning setting, obviously this is a 4-position fan, and so when you turn the key on, you can hear the fan, it'll go up. Now if you put air conditioning on, the fan speed stays the same unless you push this temperature slider all the way to the left, and you hit about this point and you keep pushing, and notice what happens. The fan goes on high, and also the recirc door opens. So that is a unique thing that GM did. The Fords didn't do that, but GM's did that for some time. And I don't like it, actually. I would prefer to be able to separate the fan speed from the recirc door, but that's how these are. Over here, you've got an interesting way to control the seat belt or put it someplace in storage. A lot of cars had clips up here, but Olds actually has it so it snaps into the B pillar there. And then what you could do is, these were made, this was kind of an intermediate setup. You can get the passenger belt out here. You'd clip that into the lower belt buckle, and you kind of, if you wanted, you could just have the lap belt, or if you wanted them combined, you could just leave that clipped in there. It was kind of a clunky setup. There's no retractor here, as you notice. And so it just didn't work that well, especially if you were changing drivers or passengers who had different heights and things. In 74, they would go to retractors on both ends, which was a much better setup. This was kind of an intermediate setup that didn't work very well, candidly. And you have a door panel, which unfortunately the interiors on these mid-sizers for GM really got cheapened over time, and pretty drab interior, relatively speaking. You know, still better maybe than the stuff they make today. At least you get a nice armrest that's padded, but the wood grain is fake. And as you can see, the stitching is just vacuum formed. It's not real stitching anywhere. And this is just hard plastic. So not a great door panel. You do get a little kick panel at the bottom, but it's very small. On the full-size cars, you'd have more of a kick panel. So they're probably trying to save money on the carpet, is my guess, by making it not that large of an area. Also have Oldsmobile floor mats here. I will say that this car has front and rear bench seats. Again, this is just a standard Cutlass S. But I will say that these bench seats, they're one of the most comfortable in any car that I've ever sat in. Certainly the most comfortable bench seats I've ever sat in. The padding is just right, not too firm, not too soft. The bottom bolster is pretty long, so I'm 6'1", and it's perfect for my leg length. It's not a short, stubby kind of bolster. They did a great job with the comfort in these bench seats, and it's nicely contoured so that you get a bit of lumbar support here. You clearly don't have any lateral support, so you slip and slide, and that's really the limiting factor on cornering in this car, is can you stay in your seat? The car actually handles and rides extremely well. I mean, extremely well. It's a great ride in handling, balance. You do only have the one light in these, aside from the kickwell lights down there. And you get a nice little funky design on it, just to show you that, well, I don't know. It's an Oldsmobile, although other GM divisions had that same design on the light too. And of course you get the great turn signal noise in these. Oh yeah, that mechanical blinker. Now this also has a fasten seatbelt warning light that's very annoying, and a separate buzzer, so that when you put the car in gear, it will beep at you. Now I have buckled my seatbelt, so let me unbuckle it. And then I will put the car in gear here, and you can see what I mean. You ready? Here goes. See it? When you put it in park, it's gone. Or reverse, it doesn't beep. Neutral, it doesn't. You put it in drive, or 2 or 1, it does. Or I guess SL, super. So, yeah. This was that phase where they had the warning light. In 74, they would go to actually not allowing you to even start the car unless you had your seatbelt buckle, at least for part of the year, until so many people complained the federal government relaxed that piece of legislation. Let's take a look under hood now. And here you have the Olds Rocket 350 V8. This came standard with a 4-barrel carburetor. I believe it weighed 180 horsepower. And these cars are actually not bad in terms of their pep. 0 to 60 is about 9 seconds or so, which for the time really wasn't bad. Certainly not fast by today's standards. And despite being a 73, you can see there's not too many vacuum lines on these. Of course, you have the GM dual chamber master brake cylinder. The dual chamber came out in 1967. And on these, as opposed to the full-size cars, well, except Cadillac, where this was true, you can see the blower motor is exposed here. Very easy to change, and frankly, I actually need to change mine, or at least lubricate it. It's making some noises, but it's getting pretty old by this point. It's 50 years old. You can thankfully do that very easily on this car. On the full-sizers, a lot of them, except the Cadillacs, you had to cut a hole in the fender, or remove the fender liner, or remove the fender or something, but this is really easy. Now, this was also an innovative feature that Olds introduced for GM, which is the plastic inner fender well. Great idea that would later go to other GM divisions, but obviously doesn't rust being plastic. And Olds was the one that pioneered that. In fact, on some of the early 442s, you'll notice that these are red, and you can see them through the wheel wells. But yeah, these are plastic. Here you have the evaporative canister for the carburetor setup. for any of the vapors from the tank or the carburetor. The Olds fuel pump there in the front, which is true for all the Oldsmobile V8s. And the filler neck that's vertical, one way to tell in Olds is that separate filler neck. There are other GM engines that have that, but Olds is one that has it. The only one that has it by the time of this car in the 70s. Now this is a 350 small block. Olds did make a larger small block. The 403 from Olds is a small block. 455 is a big block, and the 425 is a big block. But this is a physically smaller engine than the 455 and the 425. But like I said, the Olds 403 was off of this same 350 block, and it was a very over square design. The bore much greater than the stroke on that engine. In fact, it had Siamese cylinder walls, which in some cases led to overheating in some climates if your cooling system wasn't in great shape. Of course, you have the GM A6 air conditioning compressor in the setup for that, which works beautifully. Icy cold air. This one's still charged on R12. Let's take a look at the trunk so you can see what I mean when I say it's small. And there we are. It looks big, but trust me, this is not that big of a trunk. It's a pretty shallow opening, and with that spare there, it takes up a lot of space. And this does still have the original spare tire, never been on the ground. Fast track belted. Wow, look at that. Pretty sweet. And you always lose your groceries over here in the cubby hole. Or you can store stuff over there on either side. Well, and there we have it. You have also good rear seat room in these. The seat is all the way back. The front seat is all the way back, and you still have tons of leg room. They did a nice job in terms of interior comfort on these intermediates. Like I said, they do drive really well. We will close up the hood now. And there you have it, the Oldsmobile Cutlass for 1973 and the strange features, quirks, and idiosyncrasies of it. Hope you enjoyed this video. A couple more things I forgot on the interior. One is the radio antenna, which is in the window here, that I believe was started on the 1969 Grand Prix, and it works okay. Some people complain the reception isn't great. I find it to be fine. Did make the windshield replacement a little bit more expensive. Another thing is the generator light on here. When you turn the key on, you can see it says Gen. I don't know if I can get it to focus. There we go, Gen, right there. Well, these cars didn't have a generator. They had an alternator, but for whatever reason, they kept the Gen light for many years, even after the generator was gone and it became an alternator. So I guess people were used to it, and they thought, well, we won't mess with something that people are used to. So there you go. And we gotta start it up so you can hear the rocket V8. Ooh. Starts right up. Just like your typical Oldsmobile. Here we'll go outside and you can hear it. The fast idle's on because it's cold. I did put aftermarket dual exhausts on here. They're a little loud, but yeah. Love the sound of a V8 in the morning. Thanks again for watching.